Hey, family. It's Natalie Nelson Parker here, and it is Lit Live, Leading in Transformation Live. And I'm super excited tonight because we have some amazing transformers who are doing the work. We all understand what is happening during this time. We are living through a pandemic. Cities have been set on fire. People are globally protesting in what feels like a different type of civil rights movement. There is going to be a change in a way that we haven't experienced before. And did I say, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, it feels like the largest civil rights movement that we've experienced, not just in the United States, but around the world. And so we want to add some content and add some context around what it means, not only to protest, not only to talk about systemic change as it relates to racism, but to give you some resources to know the power of your vote and why your vote is so important. And so we have some amazing people on the line. And I'm not going to talk too much because it's going to be fire tonight. So go ahead, like, share, comment, put your fire signs in the comment section if you're ready. Share it and let them know that Live is on and you want to participate. We're going to start. Everybody's going to give a brief introduction, but we're going to start with our newest Lit Live member, Mr. Britton Smith. We're so excited to have you there and to make this connection. Britton, go ahead, just tell us who you are. Tell us about your story. How do you get to this place and doing this meaningful work?
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me to the Lit Live family. Right after meeting you guys, found out we were so connected, so interconnected with a lot of the folks on this screen so far. So it's a beautiful thing. Again, my name is Britton Smith. I wear many hats. I currently serve as the Faith Outreach Director for an organization called March On, which is an organization focused on organizing and helping to register and amplify the voices of so many across the masses in the efforts of voting. Also, I am the senior organizing strategist for Meek Mill and Van Jones's Reform Alliance, Criminal Justice Reform Group, where we focus on primarily probation and parole reform. And I'm also I'm a political director for a very distinct, noble organization, Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. So I happily serve.
Watch yourself.
I happily serve as the political director for my fraternity, and it's been a real honor being active in this space of social justice, of change, of advocacy. Growing up in the church, I learned at a very young age from my grandfather, who was also very active in the community and who was my pastor. I learned very early, there's something I keep reminding my fraternity brothers of, why we need to be engaged in advocacy. Thank God for Moses, who I claim as the first lobbyist, the first person to ever go and approach and literally speak truth to power and say, let my people go advocate for the needs of those who could not speak up for themselves and were not in the position to speak up for themselves. And those of us who have these platforms, those of us who have these opportunities to be vocal, to carry the issues before those who make policy, who make decisions, have an obligation to do so. And looking at it more so as a privilege to do so. And it is indeed an honor getting engaged in politics. So it's just a pleasure to be with you on this Lit Live. So I'm excited to get in this conversation with you guys, to talk about ways that we can encourage and further push more young people in this space.
I appreciate that. And I love that you use that biblical example of Moses, right? Because it's a call. It's something that's in us, and something that we're empowered to do through God. And I'm so thankful that not only have you given that example, but you are walking in that example. And there's another bad sister on the line who is walking and talking in her call. I'm glad to call her my friend, Miss Amber Louisa Lowe Woodfork, Reverend Woodfork. Introduce yourself to the people. Tell us who you are. How did you get to this place where you are in life, and what is it that you do? And I want to even say that it's not even just what you do, it's who you be. So go ahead, introduce yourself.
Well, there we go. I was muted. Yes, my name is Amber Lowe Woodfork. I am the assistant pastor at the West Mitchell Street CME Church in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm also the former director of faith outreach for Sarah Riggs Amico's U.S. Senate campaign. Unfortunately, she lost to John Ossoff. He's still a great candidate, though. So, no love lost there. But I've served as faith outreach director for many statewide and local campaigns, from mayor's races to lieutenant governor races to superior court judge races and city council. Because I've always felt like if I want to, part of making change is not just voting, it's actually getting involved on campaigns, right? And not just any campaign arbitrarily. But I always find myself working with people who I believe in when it comes to their platform, addressing social justice issues and Black issues as well, right? So I don't work for anyone who doesn't have a Black agenda and a social justice agenda as well, as it relates to marginalized communities of color, LGBTQ persons, all that good stuff, right? What else do? I do a lot of things. I consult with nonprofits. So most recently, I consulted for the ACLU of Georgia with a voter education campaign they launched around the absentee ballot initiative in this previous primary here in Georgia. As you all know, because we are in a pandemic right now, we were advised to vote by mail as much as we could. So they needed help with reaching out to faith communities and ensuring that people know how to vote by mail, right? Because it's not as easy as it seems, especially in a state that is ground zero for voter suppression, right? So they needed someone to speak to faith leaders and congregations and deliver instructions on how to correctly fill out the application to get the ballot, right? You had to get the application first, then get the ballot, which is crazy to me. But that's one of my more recent projects. I've worked for the New Georgia Project with Michaelano, who I think is going to be on in a second, as one of the faith organizers on the Loose the Chains campaign, in which we organize communities of faith, multi-faith communities, right? So Christian, Islam, Buddhist, whoever is a person of faith, around justice issues such as mass incarceration, voting rights, and education and healthcare. So I am, I'm a civic organizer, and I see myself as an activist. And I also am a PhD student as well. So I'm not busy at all. I'm at Clark Atlanta University right now, getting my PhD in literature, studying the intersection between, thank you, Kosh, studying the intersection between Black theology and literature. And all kinds of intricacies within that when it comes to race and Blackness in particular, right? So yeah, I have lots of things going on right now. So y'all pray for me. I'm also a cat mom.
Awesome. Billy's in the room. Go ahead and unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Hey, how you doing? I'm sorry I disappeared. The devil got in on my line. That's what happened. But
the devil got loose.
But I'm here. Listen, glad to be with everyone. My name is Billy Michaelano. I reside in the wonderful metropolitan area of Atlanta, Georgia. I have the great pleasure of helping people of faith to get involved in civic endeavors and to build power in communities of so-called color. And very happy to be here because I know that one of the ways in which the movement, the civil rights movement, for which I'm indebted to all of us really, has thrived is because of the way in which young adults and young people have added energy to that movement, not just now, but historically. And so very happy to be here and engage in this conversation.
Awesome. We appreciate you, Billy and Amber and Britton, who are new to the Lit Live platform. But we have some OGs in the house. Rev Kev, go ahead and introduce yourself, and then Reverend Neal Christy.
All right, I am Reverend Kevin Kosh Jr. I am the campus pastor and Wesley Foundation director for Jackson State University. I love faith-based student engagement. I love taking that and making it into student engagement and civic engagement. So I'm really trying to help students first find their voice, then define their voice, refine their voice, and in the midst of this whole process, know that their voice matters. And so that's who I am, that's who I be, and I love what I do. I'm gonna pass it over to you, Neal.
All right. I don't see Nathalie, but it's good to be back. And we've got wonderful people, so I don't want to take too much time. I want to hear from our guests tonight. But I'm Reverend Neal Christy, Assistant General Secretary with Church and Society, the International Public Policy Agency of the United Methodist Church. I'm in Washington, D.C., about 1 mile from the White House. So it's not hard for me to walk down every day and to participate in the demonstrations. And I want to share a quote with you, and it comes from William Barber, who said, "Jim Crow did not retire. He went to law school and launched a second career. Meet James Crow, Esquire." So friends, what we're dealing with tonight around voter suppression has long history, both in the church and in our country. And what Nathalie described is definitely a worldwide movement. I've been talking to students in Africa, in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, who are rising up, and they are challenging the emblems of oppression, images of Rhodes, those who were the colonizers who denied the vote for generations to Black and brown people. And so it's the young people who are leading that in southern part of Africa. We look at what's happening in Europe. We see what's happening in France. We see what's happening in England, calling to accountability the abuse of police and the policing system on Black bodies, immigrant bodies, brown bodies. And so this is definitely a global movement. And it's one that is challenging what has been codified in the United States for well over 200 years. And has directly impacted Indigenous people and African Americans today. And I'm glad to be back.
Awesome. We appreciate you. And I'm excited to just go straight in. And Billy, we want to talk to you because you are, I think Neal called it the other day, the hotbed of what's happening on the pulse of voting and voter registration, engagement, and suppression. So can you kind of frame our conversation today by giving us kind of a historical overview on what is this thing called voter suppression, and what is it? How is it still happening even today in the context where you're serving?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. I like to tell people that when you talk about voter suppression, what you really can talk about is power suppression. And what do I mean by that? We live in a representative democracy. That means that whenever decisions are made, we all don't take a vote and then it's majority rule, right? We actually elect people to go and represent us, right? So they represent our interests, or at least they're supposed to, right? And then those individuals make decisions for us. So we live in a representative democracy, right? So if that's the case, then that means representation is power, period. Representation is power, because representation is the way in which you voice, right, what you would like to see happen in our collective endeavor that we call society. And so what happens is voting is one of the primary ways that we participate in this project of representation, in this project of how it is we have power and exercise our power. So what's happened historically is that, first of all, in the beginning of this country, white men, landowners, were the only ones who they considered were viable enough to actually make these types of decisions, to have representation for decision making, right? And slowly you see the fight for voting rights extend to various different groups, right? Until we get to a point with the civil rights legislation in the 1960s, where everyone who is considered a citizen, no matter of race, creed, or gender, is allowed to vote, right? Theoretically, right? But what we saw is that, as you already talked about with the William Barber quote, In the same way that Jim Crow updated its methods, these historic methods of voter suppression began to come into play. So you had poll tax in the old days where they had these complicated tests that you would have to pass, right? And one exercise I like to do sometimes is to see how many people would pass a poll tax today with some of these questions, right? I mean, some of the is just ridiculous, but they would make people pass a poll tax. They would make people, you hear John Lewis talk about holding up a jar and people having to say how many marbles were in a jar just off of plain sight, right? Or how many bubbles could be generated from a bar of soap. I mean, this is the type of insidious craziness that people went through when they tried to vote. And then in some cases, it was just outright flat, violent intimidation, just beating people up on their way to the polls and saying, if you come to these polls, we're going to beat you up. Just vigilante white groups doing those types of things. Well, that kind of stuff doesn't happen anymore, or at least we think it doesn't happen, right? But what does happen is this, finally. In our day and time, they've upgraded those methods to intimidate groups that they don't want to turn out in large numbers to vote. A lot of times these are African Americans, brown folks, and they do it through voter suppression tactics like exact match, right? Which means however you sign your signature the first time when you register to vote, it has to be consistent with every other document that you submit or they throw it out, right? And how many people sign their signature the same way every time, right? Nobody, right? Or use it or lose it. This is where if you don't vote in recent elections, then they put you on the inactive list, right? Now, how many people have a driver's license who don't ever drive? But you don't lose your driver's license. If you don't drive for 10 years, you still can keep your driver's license. How many people got gym membership and don't use it? You know, but if you don't, here in Georgia, if you don't vote in the most recent 2 elections, you bet your bottom you're going to be put on the inactive list, right? And so these are the type of voter suppression tactics, and there are a lot more I could talk about that have to do with just the misadministration of elections, not resourcing precincts that are in majority African American communities, so that there is just widespread foolishness on election day, like what we saw here in Georgia on June 9th, where people just end up walking away and saying, I got to go to work, or it's not worth it, I don't have time. All of this is the way in which voter suppression happens. When you put all of these together, what you see is a systematic attempt to reduce the actual civic power of so-called communities of color, because that's what this is about. When I tell people, don't just talk about voting, talk about power. This is about power, right? Who has it and how you can suppress it. Finally, why does voter suppression happening right now in the way that it is, particularly in places in the South? Georgia, and you already referenced it, is ground zero for the voting rights fight, because we will be the first state in all of the South to have a non-white majority. In 2024, there will be more Black and brown people in Georgia than there are white people. That'll be the first state in the South where that'll be true, right? They already know that. So if you can't win off of the demographics, right, then you only have 2 other options, right? You either cheat, that's voter suppression, or you change the rules, that's gerrymandering, right? That's it, right? And that's what you see here happening in the South.
Now, Neal, I saw you shaking your head, and I know that you're really involved with this work through UMC Justice. Yeah. As you hear Billy share not only the historical, but what is happening now, what are some ways that churches, communities of faith, people could get involved to help protect that vote and protect that right?
So there are 2 things that I'm thinking of. One is remembering the history of the church, because the church continues to be a segregated church. The mainline United Methodist Church is what it is. It's a product of the institutional racism that this country has been bred into this country. And so we have to admit that. We need to face that. And then we have to challenge, what does it mean to be now an anti-racist church? Not only looking at a revolution from within, but what is now our responsibility as we engage in society? And I want to give a statistic that kind of, I hope that would put it into context. In 1940, only 3% of voting age African Americans were registered to vote. 3%. That was 1940. Now, of course, this was a couple of decades before the Voting Rights Amendment, and that's true. But consider what was happening 1940s, 1960s, 1970s is wealth accumulation. you have large mainline churches, predominantly white churches, gaining wealth. So middle class, a solid middle class representing their interests. But you have an African American population who's growing in terms of its activity in the mainline churches, who are not growing in wealth, not growing in representation, and the white church, predominantly white churches, doing very little, if nothing, except for hindering the black vote. And so we have to admit that. We have to look at the complicity and we need to look at the collusion that the white churches have had with white power structures to maintain the status quo. That's the first thing. Then here's a piece of hope. The hope piece is, at least with the United Methodist churches, we have about 33,000 congregations in the United States alone. 33,000. Can we redefine what we understand as the purpose of a congregation? A congregation, I would argue, is a place of, and I appreciate what's already been said, is a place of power. It's not a place of privilege. It's a place of power. It's a place to exercise liberating power. If we understand that spiritually, if we understand that in terms of engagement with the secular world, the congregation is the perfect place to organize a vote as an act of faith. Not organizing as an act of faith tells me that we're rejecting a significant portion of our faith. This is a tenet of our faith. So what would it look like for those 33,000 congregations to name the history, name the racist history, commit to being anti-racist within the church, and then as an expression of being anti-racist in our society, mobilize those 33,000 congregations, each one to be a cell that votes for the interest of those who have been marginalized and prioritizing the experience of Black and brown populations in their own community. I think that's the first step.
I think that's so important. And I want to bring Amber in because you're talking about communities of faith and churches in particular on how they can get involved. But can you break that down, Amber? What does that even mean amidst COVID, amidst this global civil rights movement where everybody now is woke and everyone's taking up arms against racism? How do I also, while we're sheltering in place, while we're quarantined, actually get people engaged in the voting process?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, know that elections most times in many places are year round, right? You don't just have the presidential election every 4 years, right? You have local races at the state level, at the municipal level, right, at the county level. So knowing all the different elections that are always going on, always in progress year round, that's number one. Number two, knowing the power of those elections, knowing that, for example, a DA, right, a district attorney can make or break the case, such as the Ahmaud Arbery case, right? That is an elected position, right? The DA is. No one appoints the DA. The citizens vote that person in, right? So number one, knowing that elections are not just every 4 years, but they are year round. Many times every 2 years, maybe in states and cities and in counties, knowing what's on the ballot, who's on the ballot, and also knowing that you can still vote even during the quarantine, right? Like I mentioned during my introduction, there's a thing such as absentee voting, right? Vote by mail, and that is the safest and secure way to vote. Because no one can, you're not subject to voting machines being tampered with, or voting power cords missing from voting machines, and voting machines not working, as we saw on election day a couple of weeks ago here in Georgia. All types of chicanery, right? But yeah, knowing that you can always vote, right? Even though it's hard. There are different ways that you can exercise your right to vote that do not limit you to the poll. The Black church, for example, in the 2018 election, when it came to the governor's race and the statewide election, it participated in a statewide vote by mail campaign in which we designated a Sunday, right, in which pastors could stand up, right, and say, today is the day that we as a congregation are going to cast our ballots by mail. We're going to fill them out during worship service. We're going to, stamp them, drop them off, all that good stuff, right, at the appropriate places. So there are multiple ways, like I said, to get involved, but just knowing what's on the ballot, who's on the ballot, it's almost like, like praying, praying in season and out of season, right? Always knowing who's representing you. And if you feel as though those who are representing you aren't doing a good job, vote them out, right? Or find someone, recruit someone who can do it better. I'm looking for someone right now in Atlanta in District 6 to run against Jennifer Ide, right? Jennifer Ide is a council person who is the chair of the budget committee, right? The finance committee on the city council. And she is opposed to defunding or reallocating police funds.
Call them out.
She's staunchly opposed to it. So I'm on a crusade right now to find someone to replace her. So know where those who are in office stand, right? And you can always find their voting record. You can talk to them. Sometimes, that they don't want to talk to you, like our senator here in Georgia. One of them, David Perdue, has not held a town hall in his 6 years in office, right? So many times it's hard to even engage with those who are in office, but you can always find their voting record. You can, by the way they interact with the community, tell where they stand, right? So just as you have the power to vote folks in, you can vote them out as well. But that requires doing the work year round, in season, out of season, staying on guard, staying woke, never taking a break. It's a job, right? Democracy is a full-time job. It doesn't take rest. It doesn't sleep because we're tired.
And that's the truth. And if you have any comments right now, go ahead and drop them in the comment section, and we'll surely address them. And I want to turn it over to Britton, because there are young people who are just tired. They're tired of what they've seen, what they've experienced. Some people are like, listen, I'm not my ancestors. This is going to end.
I hate
it. I know you hate it. That's why I said it, Amber.
I hate that saying.
And they are out in the front lines and doing the work. Can you share a little bit about your work with engaging particularly young people, and why that same energy in the front lines of protesting needs to also be in the ballot box?
Absolutely. Simply put, because it's the next step. These are all supplemental things that work together to accomplish the change. I oftentimes use the analogy about the arm extends to the door, the hand twists the knob, the legs walk in, and the mouth talks once it gets through. So it takes multiple efforts and multiple approaches in order to accomplish the change that young people want to see. And it's imperative that the young people show up to the ballot box. Billy mentioned earlier about the change in demographics, and that's not just in Georgia. That's going to be countrywide. That's nationwide. That's not just, even with another arm of March On's entity, the Future Coalition. A lot of young people who are active and engaged. They've started with initiatives about climate change, finding so many things that are affecting their demographic, affecting them. They realize that climate change is an investment to them. And now here you have a lot of young Black and brown people, young African American people who realize their lives are on the line. And it's imperative that they not only utilize that process of the visual representation, but then that tangible representation with seats in government. And Kevin and I, just to talk about our history, Kevin and I went to the same college. And while we were in college, there was a city council member, and this will also echo something that Amber was just saying. There was a city council member who I was always engaged. I'm talking about I was very politically active as an undergraduate student. I had never seen my city council member in that college, the person who was over that college. And we had a conversation. We were planning to run a student in that next election, organizing around one of our peers so that we can be represented and have an advocate for us. And so once we started and the idea floated around that little small town, once that probably going somebody else. Next thing you know, I started showing up, and then they started listening to us. And so even the threat of being active and politically engaged will cause movement. So one thing is it's going to be imperative that we actualize our power, we actualize our voices into not just votes, but even seats. I'm more concerned about even getting more folks voting, giving them a reason to vote. Bring your peers, put a peer on the ballot, put somebody you know on the ballot. Let's have a conversation and run run somebody young, run somebody from your age group, from your demographic, and that is more effective than any speech on why you should vote. A tangible person that you believe in who will advocate for you is all the reason why you need to get engaged and go vote.
Awesome. Kev, go ahead and jump in here, because there are young people who hear that and they're like, it's all well and good, but how does my vote really matter? Can you talk about this one thing for your vote to be suppressed? And we're going to bring Billy in to talk about how that is happening in ways that we can curtail that. But how do I make sure that I don't suppress my vote?
Right. So I will start by using the King statement. Dr. King said that social action without educated thought can take misdirection. It's a weak form of pure energy. He also said educated thought without social action is a one-sided value because it has no true power potential. We have to take what we know and we have to put action behind it, but we can't just be out here doing anything. When students get fatigued and wonder why their voice matters, the first thing we have to do is realize that fatigue that they're feeling, hey, students, it is real. The justice that you're seeking is procedural justice. And the reality is a lot of people don't have faith in the system because, just like Billy mentioned earlier, people cheat, there's gerrymandering. But if you are present and representation is power, then your presence is an act of resistance. And that's why you need to be there. But once you start actually tapping into your power, you have to get informed so that you can start making the changes in your community. And guess what? This isn't one time fix all type of thing. We're going to continue to learn. We're going to continue to grow. Just like Britton said, when we were students in undergrad, we didn't really know how this was going to work, but we decided to get engaged, and you learn the process. So as students, we do a lot of things like we do a lot of advocacy work, but we'll do public statements. Some people might have signs and things like that. But as you continue to move forward, it's important to realize the policies that make that even possible, because most institutions are only going to be as ethical as the law requires them to be. So you can have your protest, but I can sweep you off the street if necessary. So we have to begin to get engaged so that our interest is also being met. I like the way that as Amber speaks, she's willing to call out, because a lot of times we suppress our voice because we don't want no problems. We don't want no trouble. Well, sometimes if you want some change, you have to say, well, this is the problem, and you are calling the problem. And a lot of times we don't necessarily want to do that. We have to be able to use our minds and take our fights in different ways. Celebrate those small victories, but remember what your goal is. So my students, a lot of them, they're really concerned with police brutality right now. And so those are the things that you need to speak to. And so, yes, we celebrate the small victories when we have a law that changes the chokehold, or laws that restrict no-knock warrants. But remember what the goal is. We don't want police killing unarmed Black people and using unnecessary force. And so as we celebrate the small victories, we continue to move forward, because just like they said earlier, things will always adjust because people are trying to maintain their power, their privilege, and their position. And if you are going to be empowered, we have to be willing to call that out, because sometimes the reason why we don't use our voice is because systematically there have been laws that said you can't use your voice. And once we start doing that, students realize that your voice matters. The reason why Russ College was so pivotal was because it's a small city, and when the students are there, they can literally affect the vote. But why can students vote wherever they are? Realize that it was a court case that happened from a student at Russ College who will later on go on to be a president at Morris College, who got that to go to the Supreme Court. So now students can vote at the place where they attend school at. So you getting engaged matters, and you're at an age to where people are willing to mentor you and nurture you so that you can be in the seat to be an instrument of change for yourself and your community. So yes, the fatigue is real, but unlike saying you not like your ancestors, realize that the same resiliency that rests in your ancestor is still in you, and you're called to tap into that, because the fatigue is real, but you're resilient, and your presence is an act of resistance. Stay resilient, stay involved, get engaged, learn something. Don't just be moving out here with no reason. Get informed so our deeds aren't misguided and misused against us.
Didn't he preach? Amen, brother. Billy, I want to bring you in here because Neal, you and I were talking about this earlier this week, that there is power in the vote, right? And the misconception with the voter suppression, with all of the tactics and all of the shadiness and backdoor things, the reality of the narrative is that we are powerful, particularly, Billy, with what you shared in regards to statistics and the browning of America in the hotbed of Georgia and across the country. Can you talk about how do we harness that power? How do we challenge that resiliency and persist and protect our vote?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. And I appreciate everything that's being said. I mean, it's all right on. But really, this is a civic issue, right? So when we talk about voter suppression, voting, that's all a civic issue. And there are really only 4 ways that you create change on civic issues, just 4 ways. One is through legislation. The other is through litigation. The other is through agitation. And the other is through mobilization. Only 4 ways, right? Only 4 ways. So that means that we need people who are working in all these areas, right? Who are pushing towards the same goal. And that is to remove as many barriers as possible to people being able to participate in the democratic process, period. I mean, the truth of the matter is, it could take probably everybody here and everybody listening every bit of probably 20, 30 minutes to solve most of the election problems we have in this country. Because it ain't rocket science, right? You could come up with a way to make sure that everybody has fair and accessible, right, ways to vote wherever they are. We could make it easy. We could do this. We could do this if we wanted to, right? So really the issue is that there are people who are in power who actually don't want to make it easy for us to vote. Like, you have to keep this in mind, that don't be under the illusion, right, that we live in a country where they want everyone to participate in the democratic process, right? It's quite the opposite, right? So that means that we need people working towards the goal of expanding democracy so as many people as possible. And so we need some people who are going to go and be lawyers. Maybe you're not going to be a lawyer. Maybe you're just going to study the litigation, right? Study the cases so that you can begin to bring the suits. At bare minimum, if you experience a problem, write it down. Call one of these hotline numbers that you see and let somebody know right away. Talk to a civil rights attorney or attorney that's been put on these things right away, because the story collection matters. Every time we want to bring a lawsuit around an election with our organization, we got to have stories that we can bring to the judge, so the judge know we just not in here talking, making up stuff, trying to have some political vendetta. Like, no, these are real people who actually experience these issues. So you can at least tell your story at bare minimum of what you've experienced as a student or whatever the case may be. Then you have your legislation. We've already talked about how you hold your elected officials accountable. I don't have to say anything about that. That's been said well. But this agitation, we have to agitate when necessary, right? We got to get out there, and we have to be heard. We got to show up. We got to sit in. We got to say, I'm not leaving. In 2018, when they stole an election here, I took a group of faith leaders into the interim Secretary of State's office, and I said, we're going to come back here every day until we get a meeting. And if we got to come in here with, truckloads of jerk chicken and have lunch and sit in here and eat lunch in your office and not move until we get a meeting, that's what we're going to do. And that's what we told her. And it's on camera. And in 2 days, we had a meeting. In 2 days, they called us because people went to jail. 18 people went to jail in a protest that day, because sometimes the issues they merit us having to put our own selves at risk as a prophetic symbolism that these issues are too important to sit around and just simply talk about it. At some point, we have to put ourselves out there, and then we got to mobilize people. We got to use every tool we have at our disposal You know, we got to use tools like this. We got to get out in the streets. We got to use our artists. We got to use our pulpits. We have to mobilize people around the issues to let them know this is too important. This is too important to just go about things as usual. So I think if we do those things, we not only have a good shot, we will win, because when we fight, we win. I believe that.
I love that. And I love that you paint for us the picture of how everybody's purpose, every person's way of participating is important and valuable. And I want to bring you in, Brenton, because you've been doing this work for so long. So as we talk about legislation, litigation, agitation, and mobilization, and the stories, I love what Rev said, truth on the loose, that those stories are important, that we need to harvest those stories and those narratives. In your work, what are some of the most outstanding stories that you have experienced and witnessed to help someone hear that I could do it too, that there's something in this for me to connect with?
One of the things, and I'll share some story, some that have the most positive outlook, and some that, you know, didn't have the most optimal outcome. One of the stories, a good friend of mine, Mandela Barnes, who's Lieutenant Governor of Wisconsin, he has been very vocal, been very public about the issue they faced in Wisconsin about petitioning to be safer at home, and how, in addition to gerrymandering, it was a tactic used to get folks to scare them for voting in polling places. And, you know, you see these stories of, simply put, just tactics used to modern day voter suppression. You know, whether it is the James Crow Esquire, these tools that are used through our courts, as Billy mentioned, these tools that are used through our state houses that we never pay attention to. Why? Because we don't go vote at all the elections. We're fired up to go vote in the presidential election. Maybe we're upset. Maybe we're mad. We don't return for the midterms. We don't return for the mayoral or municipal elections. We don't return for the judicial elections. And to further that is why we never seem to get a jury of our peers, because they take the juries from the voter rolls. And if we're not engaged, and if we're not active, registered to vote, it's hard for me to get a jury of my peers if my peers aren't registered to vote. So there's so many implications of this. And, you know, one of the more, it's interesting you asked about the stories of the unfortunate absence of the necessary voters. Even looking at the church community, Pontius Pilate found no fault in Jesus Christ, and he turned it over to the people and said, you know what? I find no fault in this man. What say ye? And if we'd have had the Christian community come out and advocate at that time, we could have, the Lord's will would have still been done, but we could have exposed the system a long time ago.
Appreciate that. There in the comments, stand up for right, join the fight, be a soldier. Everyone should stand up and write. Legislators, congressmen, allow your voice to be heard. United we stand, divided we fall. Someone said, preach, Brenton, preach. You talking good, Reverend. All right, this is your last moment. We're gonna go with Neal. Neal, go ahead and just share your final thoughts and point us into some resources.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I want to say thank you, because this is amazing. It's like you all are doing tremendous work. You're doing it with communities. You're doing it long term. So I'm very, very grateful. And this is great. I'm learning even more just listening to you. I want to highlight two opportunities, and these are priorities within the United Methodist Church. One is immigration, and the second is incarceration. Immigration first. In terms of immigration, we have to look at the numbers, and we have to look at the potential to mobilize power. There are currently 43.7 million immigrants living in the United States. About 11.1 million, about 25%, are undocumented and need a path to citizenship. Naturalized citizens are eligible to vote. Lawful residents and undocumented immigrants are not eligible. If we were to factor in their age, 18 and above, can you imagine that there are about half of the immigrants in the United States, bottom line, that are not voting? If we had even half the number of people who are immigrants here, contributing taxes, contributing with their labor, contributing to the education pool, raising their families, investing in communities, if these immigrants were given an opportunity to vote, can you imagine how this would shift Black and brown communities in particular? Second is incarceration. We know as people of faith that everyone deserves a second chance. And so the United Methodist Church has a resolution that we have been working on, and we're going to give even more attention to, that focuses on not just free and fair elections, but the responsibility for us to secure the vote for those who have paid their debt to society, those who are coming out of prison and jail, and making sure they're able to vote. Florida is a great example where people of faith came together, and while the governor has resisted it, people of faith continue to fight the majority voted for those who had formerly incarcerated to be able to vote again. People of faith were mobilizing behind that movement. We've got to focus on the criminalization of people of color, looking at the impacts of mass incarceration, and one of those impacts is disenfranchisement. And so we've got to focus on how we can secure the vote for people who are leaving prison as an act of faith. And so in terms of resources, I would encourage people to pay attention to what's happening with General Borders Church and Society, with the United Methodist Church is saying, with its statements on anti-racism, but also in particular, take a look at the legislation that we're inviting you to get behind. When we're inviting you to talk to your representatives and your senators and to mobilize those in your congregations, take a look at our website, umcjustice.org, and we'll give you a few more pointers and directions. We invite you to go with us.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Neal. Amber, where do I go to find out the information about voting by mail? Where do I go to learn more about who these candidates are?
Yeah, when it comes to voting by mail, I would say, for example, in Georgia, there are several organizations that focus on voting rights. So, for example, the New Georgia Project, Fair Count, Fair Fight, the NAACP, right? All these nonprofit organizations that have a vested interest in people exercising their right to vote, right? So whatever city or state you're in, do a quick search on who is doing voter education work, voter protection work, right? In your state and in your community. And the second part of your question was, I'm sorry.
You answered it. You got it.
Nathalie.
Because you're a doctoral student.
Oh, I did. I thought it was like another part.
Brittany, go ahead.
No, I know what it was.
No, go ahead, Amber.
Yeah, I think you also asked where to find out about the candidates who are on the ballot, right? So I know, for example, again, in Georgia, you can go on ballotpedia.com during any election, whether it be local, as far as municipal, county, statewide, and also federal, ballotpedia.com, and find out everything about those who are on the ballot, what their positions are. Not sure about their voting record being on that resource, but, ballotpd.com.
Ooh, that's really good. That's an excellent resource. Thank you so much, Amber.
Mm-hmm.
Britton, your final words and resources to help particularly young people get involved during this time.
Absolutely. One of the things that it's going to be imperative that we understand the process and take the time to go into our schools, go into our various settings. I'm a product of the Mississippi Boys State Program, where I was proud to participate and return to serve as the first Black director in the state's history. And one of the things that program taught me was understanding the state and local governmental process, participating in these type of programs, encouraging these type of programs, engaging in various opportunities. My mother, who is also one of the biggest influences for me in social justice, had me paging when I was in the 6th grade. Didn't want to do it, against my will, not under my own volition, and I loved it. I loved everything that was affected in our state: forestry, education. it all took place in the State House. And so I was intrigued by the process. So falling in love and understanding the process, understanding the rules of the game. Just because you leave the field doesn't mean the game's over. Understanding the rules of the game will encourage more young people to get involved, get engaged. And for more information, especially about the work that we're doing, wearemarchon.org, and also find out information about registering to vote and something we're doing, vote tripling, where you're bringing a friend, partnering with peers to go vote together. So wearemarchon.org, as well as our future coalition.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Truth on the loose. Billy Michaelano, help us tonight. How can we stay and persist and protect our vote? And of course, let us know how we can be resourced and stay in touch with you. For those of us, we have a lot of people who are watching from the Atlanta, Georgia area.
Sure. So one of the ways that people don't talk enough about that you can protect the vote is actually through your Board of Election Monitoring, right? So if whatever the local county group or however you break it down, parish, whatever it is, wherever you are, actually go and take minutes in those meetings, or have somebody take minutes, because actually a lot of this is hyper local, right? It's not national, it's not state. A lot of these decisions are made right on local levels. And those are ways that we can really affect change by just being abreast of what the decisions are, right? And using our voices. So that's one way I would say, look for the hyper local ways wherever you are to begin to affect change on that level around voting, right? And then the other broader thing I would say is just do some election protections too. Volunteer to actually help people on election day to make sure not just vote, but after you vote, if you have time, if you ain't in some of these long lines, help to stay there and protect the vote and look at what's going on. And when you see people having trouble, direct them to the places that they need to go, that they can get help. Document when there are technical difficulties, all of that. Like, we have to protect polling booths. These are seem like small things, but these are actually the things that make the most difference when it is we're actually trying to fight. If you want to do anything like that with us, with the New Jersey Project, if you happen to be around, newjerseyproject.org, loosetoChange.net are both ways that you can find us, and BM Honor on all social media platforms. You can reach out to me directly. We'll try to help you get plugged in if you aren't around here in Georgia. We have partners all over the country, like many of them on this conversation tonight. We'd be happy to help you out, and it's been good to be with you all.
Oh man, we appreciate you, Rev Kev. And I saw Miss Pris making her cameo appearance. Isn't that the most pretty little kitty you've seen?
She is out of control right now.
Rev Kev, give us some last words of encouragement and help us to continue on this fight, because we know our voice and our vote are important.
Continue to challenge your leaders of faith, and also those that are work at your college. Challenge them to make sure that, hey, how does this apply to my faith? Challenge them to show you ways so that you can make sure that you're getting some type of voter education, so that you're getting some type of voter engagement, so that you are comfortable with the process. Like Britton said earlier, it doesn't just stop at the polls. Continue to stay engaged. What are ways that you can get engaged? You can call. You can write, you can go visit. Like, they might not want you, or you might feel timid, but continue to do these things so that you can get comfortable with the process, but also challenge your leaders, whether it's in the church or whether it's in the classroom. I want my faith and I want my education to lean towards civic engagement. You have the right to do that. And this is what's going to help us start shifting the process, but also know our power within and without the process. And so I challenge you to get involved so that you can learn and get comfortable, but also challenge your leaders to say, hey, I want some more voter engagement, some more voter in education, so that I don't feel hopeless. And continue to do the work. Awesome. Continue to do the work.
Is there such an outfit like Lit in the Indiana, Chicago area? We're coming there. We'll be there soon.
So also for the young people who kind of just want to know what election stuff is going on, you can go to rockthevote.org and they can kind of like tell you what election stuff is going on in your area, so that you can start getting involved and not just in the presidential elections. But rockthevote.org is something that's good. Colorofchange.org is something that's good. And then also the National Action Network. That is also something that's good, and we can drop those resources off for you in the comments.
Yes, thank you so much. And again, we're going to be compiling all of these links in one document, and will be in the comment section. We appreciate all of you for participating. Little Parker is here. He wants to make his cameo. But we appreciate all of the work that you're doing and how you are informing and mobilizing our communities. So that's it. That's all to the clock on the wall. We had a good 55 minutes. We are going to be taking a hiatus for Lit Live for the next 2 weeks. Next time that we come back, we'll be honoring the life of Toyin Salu, who is connected to our network through the FAMU Wesley campus ministry. And so we're going to take 2 weeks off. We want you to enjoy your Juneteenth. Justice Con is happening this weekend. It's a free conference that will also be in the comment section. And make sure that you go forward and know that the power is not only in your voice, but also in your vote. We love you, no matter who you are, no matter where you are in life. Formation starts with you.